All right, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lambert, and I'm going to be talking to Dr. Cooney, Egyptologist, today about this god Osiris and his resurrection from the dead. Yes, it's very similar sounding when I say it to that of somebody we know who's going to be celebrated on Good Friday and then, of course, Resurrection Sunday, which we're in the middle of. And why not go to the OG God, right? The original gangster of resurrection, and that is Osiris himself. But to do so, we need to talk to someone who's an expert. And that expert I've brought on is Dr. Cooney. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I just learned what OG meant because I'm old, my son had to teach me. And I'm like, what's OG? And now I know, and people laughed at me, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's okay. There's certain things I'm learning. Someone typed, "This is based" in the chat the other day, and I was like, based. What? That sounds almost derogatory. And then some people are like, no, actually, it could be good. And I'm like, I don't know what the heck it means, so I got to look it up. But Osiris, let's just get into it, right? We'll talk about your books. We'll talk about your website. All of that stuff will be things we're going to promote as time goes by, but we need to get right into the content. People are tired, the long intros, right?
I don't know. You tell me.
Trust me, I'm telling you. So there's this god named Osiris, and he's like, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 years older than Jesus, and he dies in the narratives and is resurrected from that dead that he experienced. And then, of course, goes on to live into this other realm.
Yeah.
Can you introduce us to this god?
Yeah, Osiris is very old. His first mention, I believe, is in the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom. So those date in writing to around 2400 BCE, but they're probably much older and go back to 2600, 2700 BCE. It's not quite clear. The pyramid texts were something that they were recited before they were actually written down and carved into stone. And the story of Osiris was jealously guarded by the Egyptian priests. And what I mean by that is the story is so horrific and sad, and yet so full of potential hope that they didn't talk about the murder and the dismemberment and the death part, but they did talk ad nauseum about the resurrection and the coming back to life part. So this story of Osiris is a way for the ancient Egyptians, any humans, to wrap their heads around what we do with death, how we grieve, how there's a moment of waiting time. Like right now, it's the Saturday before Easter Sunday. We're in that waiting time. And what you then how you come out the other side, because Osiris is able to resurrect himself bodily and reveal himself to his people. And when he does, the crops come back, the wheat grows, the barley grows, everyone has wheat, beer and bread and all of these wonderful things. And yet Osiris is changed. He's different now. He's a different kind of god. And then accompanying the putting back together of Osiris and the sexual recreation of Osiris surrounding that action or that series of actions is his sister wife Isis. So the Osiris story is very much a male, female, like two sides of the same coin sort of discussion. And it's about how you have a recreation from death into new life, and bringing Jesus into it, I think, is quite apt.
I was thinking earlier, me and Neil from Gnostic Informant, he already put a super chat up we can get into in just a second, but we thought it was a little bit coincidental that the mother of Osiris is Isis, and his wife is also Isis. So the mother who birthed him is also his consort. So you have that, which was like, okay, that's interesting. Jesus is born of a mother named Mary, and then it's kind of really strange about his relationship with this Mary Magdalene. I'm not saying, obviously, they seem to be two characters, but why the names have to be the same? Of course, one could try to rationalize, well, Mary might have been a common name, yada, yada, yada. These are interesting narratives to me, not so much historically what actually happened. So I wonder if you know what I'm thinking, like what's going on here.
It's very interesting the way Jesus, in many ways, is a conflation of the powers of Osiris and Horus simultaneously, so that he is there resurrected with the help of his mother and connected to that mother, but also resurrected with the help of a consort, a caretaker, a wife in Osiris's case. Now, you can bring in the Egyptian parallels as much as you want. The fact that the women, his wife and his potential partner or lover, this other woman, this Mary Magdalene, have the same name is very interesting. I don't want to go into too much there. And the whole Mary Magdalene discussion is, I'm sure you've had that before, and I'm not the person to have it. But it's, Christianity didn't come out of nothing. It came out of a larger North African, West Asian religious soup, if you like. And they're pulling from all different things. And the Osiris story is old, and it's part of all kinds of religious mystery cults already. And it makes sense then that once it really becomes grounded in this part of the world, that they pull Egyptian mystery ideas into the Jesus mythology. So he is Horus, son of Isis. At the same time, he's the virgin birth. We could talk about that. He sits on the lap of his mother. Horus does on the lap of Isis, in the same way that Jesus sits in the lap of his mother Mary. And then this idea of Osiris being reborn, that you have the women mourning outside of the tomb, wrapping the body to put it into the tomb, there when the stone is rolled back and he's there resurrected, that they're a part of that in a sense. So there's a lot of parallels that one can make.
Yeah, and the thing about parallels is there's no definitive, absolute proof of connecting these things. It's just really weird to say that it has no influence. I've had someone online just post before we started the stream. There's an article saying how there's no influence of the Osiris myth on Jesus's narrative. And of course, Christian apologists love to do that all day long. I just found it quite ironic because the same methodology that gets used oftentimes to say there's no connection, you could use that against Dionysus. I mean, one of the arguments is, well, Jesus didn't have his phallus necessarily go missing. Did Dionysus ever have his penis go missing? Or am I missing something? Because I don't think that part of the narrative was borrowed, but everyone who's a classicist that has at least awareness of Egyptian mythology and knows the Greek world knows they're co-opting and retelling Osiris within their own mythic tradition.
It's true. What I would say is largely missing in the Christian reworking, retelling. And before I get into that, one very important point. Christians might want to say that the Bible is completely new. And then when they learn about the Gilgamesh story that has the flood story in it, you realize that Noah is not new. And there's all kinds of ancient Near Eastern texts that are a good 1,000 years or more older than anything that's written down in the Bible. So the Hebrew Bible itself has many older text traditions that one could link back to. So, there's nothing new under the sun in many ways. And these things were verbally communicated before they were written in Sumerian or written in Akkadian. But going back to that Christian idea, one thing that I find missing, and one wonders if it's missing from the actual story as it happened, and we will never know this. The historical Jesus is bandied about and argued about all the time. But sexuality is completely gone from the Jesus story. There's no wife, there's no girlfriend, there's no love, there's no sex, there's no anything. When you look at Dionysus on the one hand for an Eastern Mediterranean resurrection tradition, it's very sexy. All kinds of drinking and sexuality to create that resurrection. You look at the Egyptian North African tradition, you see the same thing. Osiris remakes himself through an act of sex with himself. And then Isis swoops in to catch the seed and create Horus. All of this is gone from the Jesus story. And Jesus is very much emasculated, which is part of the Christianity that I grew up with as a Roman Catholic, that sex was not to be discussed, that sex was repressed. Sex was something that a whole class of religious leaders were not meant to partake in. We know how that turned out in the Roman Catholic tradition, and it's not good. And it's pretty recent in the Roman Catholic tradition as well. But yeah, sexuality has been excised from the resurrection tradition. And that part is quite painful. And it's a huge part of human beings. My 12-year-old son just told me, Mom, you said to me that sex is like the most important thing about human beings and it colors everything they do. And I'm like, I did say that. I did indeed say that. And it's very odd to have resurrection without sex. And here we have, so it's easy for a Christian apologist or an evangelical to look at this and say, no, they're two completely different things. The one is all sexy time and the other one doesn't have any of it. And
Exactly.
right. And so it makes perfect sense that you could then remove yourself from it. But I would argue this is purposefully done to disconnect from the Dionysian strands of the tradition, to disconnect from the Osirian Horus strands of the tradition.
And it may be due to influence by philosophy. A lot of philosophers started to say sex is really a lower, the philosophical layers to heaven, the higher up, the less material, right? So sex was kind of this seen almost in that lower level thinking, and you want to rise above that. So maybe there's some impact there from the philosophies that were
looking at creation traditions, if you look at creation traditions, Egyptian ones, you can't get any sexier. If you look at Mesopotamian creation traditions, there's sex everywhere. But as you move into the Iron Age, the Age of Empire, even in Egypt, you see the Shabaka stone, which talks about creation by Ptah of Memphis, and he speaks what he's thinking, and it becomes magically created by his speech, which is something that we in our Western tradition are very connected to, and God spoke, right? So even in first millennium BCE, you see a human interest in removing sex from creation. I don't know why that is, but it's something you see preceding Christianity, and that's an interesting development that one could tie into things.
There's so much. Let's get to the super chat here real quick, because I think it'll set us off for a good start. Scrolling back up here, Gnostic Informant in the house with a 20 says Plutarch, Moralia on Isis and Osiris 43. It talks about the Egyptians celebrating the passing of Osiris into the moon and celebrate this during the month, which is Famineth. I hope I'm saying that right. Nisan, April. Can this influence Christianity?
Yeah, everything's going to influence Christianity. One really interesting thing that you see Christian apologists try to avoid is any sort of connection of their religious rites and celebrations with the actual moving of the seasons. Darkest day of the year is a birth of Jesus. When you light the fires, your Yule log, all of those ideas of new life, and Easter, this resurrection of the earth itself. So to disconnect those things, in many ways, it's part of Christianity. But then you have the church and the institution then putting them back into a polytheistic tradition. I don't want to say pagan, because pagan is a word that's imposed by Christianity. So using those polytheistic traditions as touchstones for different parts of the Jesus mythology, I think works. Putting it into a lunar cycle is really interesting, because this is something that the ancient Egyptians, that every ancient person did. They knew the different lunar months. They knew which constellation each lunar month was in. They knew what that constellation was representative of and what was supposed to happen in that month. They knew what you were supposed to celebrate. The idea that you have here a full moon and that this is the culmination of the resurrection is wonderful, because a full moon is kind of like, as the sun and moon are moving around the earth, right? And from our perspective, we see it in this way, and the moon is partly revealed. But when they're opposite each other perfectly, you have the moon fully revealed. You have your full moon. And it's kind of like a sexual moment, if you will, between sun and moon. Wow. It's a kissing, if you like. And to have Osiris be able to resurrect himself on that full moon, it's a union of masculine and feminine. It's a union of these two different elements. Now, I have to back up a little bit, because the ancient Egyptians did not think of the moon as feminine. They thought of the moon as embodied by the god Thoth, Thoth, either baboon god or the ibis bird god. But as things develop more into the Greco-Roman period, and if you look at texts from the ancient temple of Dendera, you'll see the moon takes on a more feminine quality. And so to see the birth of Osiris in a certain lunar month, I mean, yeah, it makes perfect sense. You're going to connect that to the month when the inundation is, the river inundates every year, the Nile River, and it leaves those waters all over the land with all of this rich earth, this black silt. And then when those waters start to recede, it leaves that black earth behind. And that's the body of the god. If you grew up Catholic, you're talking about the body of Christ all the time, right? The ancient Egyptians were always talking about the body of the god. And what did they do with that body? But they planted their seeds in it. And they created their next season's crop in that body of the god. The god, that rich black earth was his resurrection for them. And that was then used. But the moon is all part of this, because there's ideas of, okay, well, the moon is full at this point in this month. Now's the point to plant our crops. Now's the point. Or think of what it was like to be an ancient Egyptian when the Nile flood is inundated all over your lands. You're going through your stores of grain. You're probably on like the last little bucket of grain that you grind up to make into some sort of bread. And you're like, oh my God, will these river waters please recede so that we can get it dried out, so that we can start with the next crop? People are starting to get hungry. They're getting bored. They're getting annoyed. When that lunar month comes with the moon that's full, they're like, oh, thank God Osiris is going to be reborn. And it connects to this whole cycle of life and death. So to connect that to Easter, here's the problem, Derek. It's that the Egyptian seasons are different from the Western seasons. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because the flooding of the Nile starts in June, is going to end in August. And the spring is going to come in what is a Western or Northern hemispherical fall. And it's kind of opposite from what it is in a rain-fed agriculture like Mesopotamia right next door, or the Levant. But they're linking it to a time that is when you have the new agricultural season. And that would have been the same for Easter and its connection to Jesus, and the new year and its connection to Osiris.
So just so I'm on the same page, and maybe our audience follows along and they're like me, you're saying that the date on a calendar is irrelevant technically. It's really when in that region did life around spring forward and greenery, right? Like I always thought in oral cultures that I imagine Egypt was, even if they did have hieroglyphics and stuff, they were mostly probably an oral culture like the rest of the cultures out there. They would connect dots in their thinking that we today would not necessarily connect. Look, Venus shows up at this time of the year each year, and next thing you know, there's greenery coming up. Maybe that Venus has the power of life. And so they attribute power or agency to things that may or may not have that power. Or noticing the cyclical nature of the moon, its cycles, and how, like you said, the river rises and comes down, and it may have some observational connection to when in time you see these things happen. So I was wondering, you're saying time-wise on a calendar, people who try to say it was exactly on this day in Easter of April, when we celebrate April or when we celebrate our Easter, it may not be like that, but there seems to be a connection in terms of life coming forward wherever the region is. And maybe this moon thing, because if one doesn't take this as literal historical, Jesus had to have died and rose again on a Sabbath, not just a Sabbath, but high holy day, there's a full moon described in the Gospels taking place here. Is that just irrelevant coincidence, or do you think maybe there's more here?
I think the moon is a pregnancy. The moon is a culmination. The moon is a symbol of new life. And even though Egypt is really weird, Egypt is a very strange place, because and people like Herodotus in the 5th century who came from Europe and looked at Egypt, they're like, their rivers flow backwards, their seasons are opposite. It's really bizarre. When there's drought in other parts of the world, there's not drought in Egypt. That's why so many people from the Levant, when there's issues, they go running to Egypt, because Egypt's going to keep them safe. There's all kinds of things in Egypt that are kind of opposite land, but the moon is still going to be there helping the people, whether in Egypt or in Europe or in West Asia, understand when to celebrate a rite and when there's a culmination of something. The moon, which we like when we're driving, we had a full moon last night and the night before. I look out and I'm like, oh, look at the beautiful moon. And then I go back around about my day as I'm driving about the neighborhood. It's not something where I'm outside in the world with my fire embedded in my landscape, constantly looking at the moon. But if you were, you would have noted where on the horizon the moon was. You would have noted certain colors of the moon. You would have associated a larger moon or a smaller moon with certain seasons. And you would have done so naturally, even without a priest to tell you that it was a certain moon or not. You would have just known. And it embeds God and resurrection in the landscape and in the cycles of that yearly landscape. And that, I think, here's where the Osiris Jesus thing splits off, because when the Jesus cult gets embedded into an institution, it's embedded for the most part in a West Asian, Jewish, and then into a Greek and Italian institution of a rain-fed agriculture rather than that weird and wacky Nile River irrigation agriculture. So the moon may be important, but seasonally it's going to be a bit of an opposite land. If that makes any sense. But rising of stars and other things, I mean, all of this stuff is going to work from a polytheistic perspective.
So I just imagine people who might make those connections or try to over compare. It may or may not be something, is the point I'm getting at, in terms of Jesus and dying at this time and rising during a full moon festival that Jewish people were celebrating. It may, but it may not. Who knows?
Yeah, and I'm not an expert of Jewish cultural tradition, so I'll leave that one be. But for the ancient Egyptians, the idea of a full moon being something pregnant with new life and resurrection is right on point. It's right on point. And the idea of spring in each place is on point. So
okay.
It works.
It works. Okay. We got another question from DJ Wilkins. Thank you so much, DJ. Does "you will not allow your Holy One to undergo decay" Psalms 16:10 reflect Egyptian pharaoh mummy theme influence?
I don't know, DJ. And if I may look at the entirety of Psalm 16:10? I can see you're doing the same. Mm-hmm. Psalm 16. Let's look at the entirety of this thing. Let's see. I say to the holy people who are in the land, they are the noble ones in whom is all my delight. Those who run after other gods will suffer more and more. I will not pour out libations of blood to such gods or take up their names on my lips. Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I'm getting there. I will praise the Lord who counsels me even at night. My heart instructs me. I will keep my eyes always on the Lord. In my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. Okay, so we have different translations. I'm looking at the New International Version, NIV, and I don't know what DJ's looking at. But here we have, he's talking to the Lord, El, I would presume, in the Hebrew of this Psalms text, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. So this idea, I wouldn't say it's that crazy, because what's being stated is that God will not let the body of his followers rot. And you could then start Googling, DJ, and start looking for the followers of Osiris, which was a cult saying. And if you were a follower of Osiris, then it's you're following in these traditions and these rites. And Isis is there to make sure when his body is murdered and dismembered by his brother Seth, to collect all of his body parts together and create the first mummy and treat it such that it will not rot. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of connection. There's all kinds of connections that I am encouraging biblical scholars and biblical PhD students at UCLA in particular to look at and connect between Hebrew Bible and ancient Egyptian traditions. I think these things are very possible. There's back and forth all the time.
In your book, The Good Kings, I think you also mentioned a few passages in this, and we're going to be plugging that here shortly. Don't worry. But you show through the Akhenaten kind of monotheistic thinking, we see some stuff highlighted in the Hebrew scriptures that connects there. But I didn't want to rabbit trail off. Since it is Easter, we got to celebrate Osiris's resurrection, if you know what I mean. I meant Jesus. I meant, which one is it, Dr. Cooney? I mean, let me ask it this way. This is another way. I'm getting you down into the nitty gritty of the things I see and engage, right? Scholars I interview all the time will say stuff like they almost will go, yeah, that's a given in academia. They don't know what happens often on the internet world. You just got to read a comment section or two to really get like acquainted with the kind of stuff. Did the ancient Egyptians sincerely believe that a person named Osiris at some point existed? Was this person a man at one point becoming a god?
The Egyptians did indeed believe that there was a person named Osiris who was a king on earth. And that king was archaic, a king before memory, a king that people don't really remember anymore and they can write only vague stories about. And this king, God king, of course, he's still a god, is murdered by his brother Seth. And it's that story that starts the whole cycle going. Now, did the Egyptians actually believe this, or did they see it in the world around them? There, I don't want to make the Egyptians seem like so naive that they believed Osiris was this god king and materialized him. That's a very Western mindset, to need there to be a historical Osiris in the way we need there to be a historical Jesus. The Egyptians saw Osiris all around them. They lived and breathed Osiris. And I would argue that ancient Christians saw Jesus all around them too, lived and breathed it. And when the wheat rose up, they're like, okay, we have, Jesus rising again. And here we go with a new cycle. And it worked very well and connected with their old polytheistic ways. That's why the polytheistic rites and calendar days were retained in different parts of the world. So
this is an interesting point. I thought about the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus says in this earlier gospel, it's early. It may not be the earliest, but it's early. And I think Elaine Pagels thinks it's earlier. But anyway, either way, whatever your position is, he says, when you lift up the rock, I'm there. You go here, I'm there, I'm there, I'm there, I'm everywhere. Like I'm always with you, that kind of stuff. So yes, it seems there's some influence here that the idea is there. I wanted to ask if he was in their theology, or in their theology may not be the proper word, in their narrative, in their story about Osiris, if this was a man who became a god and like really became the example set, of course, where the elites would be able to follow suit. Eventually, maybe the more common folk over the next millennia or whatever. The question is like, just like Jesus was a man the whole time, though, in all of his narratives, there are hints of him being much more than that. So then he becomes fully in his glorified state, of course, post-death. And of course, even beyond that, he has to ascend first. Because there's a narrative where it's like, don't touch me. I haven't been glorified. I haven't even gone to become what I'm supposed to be. Is there some overlap in the story of Osiris in some way?
Yeah. So two things. I'll say one, that Jesus and Osiris share the idea that they're divine and yet can be killed. So whether or not Osiris was a man or not, I would say his story is much more divine than Jesus's is. Mm-hmm. That he has come onto this earth as a god, and yet he can be killed. He is of a material body such that he can be murdered and dismembered and has to be saved. And I think in that sense, he's very much like Jesus. And then the second comparison is that their raison d'etre, their reason for being in this world, is their death. It is the moment after the death. They cannot become what, as you say, what they need to become until the death. So the death is the mechanism of doing what they were sent here to do, in a sense. And if they hadn't undergone that death, in Osiris's case, murder by Seth, in Jesus's case, murder by a Roman Empire. But both of them are horrific ways to die. Both of them are unjust ways to die, and they share that. That death is the thing that starts the cycle off, and both of them have to give their body up in a sacrifice. So these things are all connected, and without that sacrifice, you don't have the new life. And so when we say Jesus died for you and, to relieve you of your sins, Osiris also was murdered so that the life could go through this cyclical regeneration. And arguably before Osiris's death, you had some kind of Garden of Eden where you didn't have this kind of cyclical regeneration. After his death, you do. And it brings the world to a much more materialized place. So the comparisons just keep going on and on.
You made me think of martyrdom right away. I mean,
Yeah.
In early literature, and Paul talking about, I'm filling up what was lacking in Christ's crucifixion or in his death. And that, there is this notion that I've said this, Christians who say they're Christians today, and they argue against me that I never was one. Like, you kind of want to throw something back to like give a defense. And it's like, listen, you want to get technical, you're not really a Christian till you actually carry your cross and die on his behalf. If you want to be really technical, you need to die, become a martyr for Christ. Then I can maybe say, but as I think it was Nietzsche or somebody said, there was only one Christian and it was Christ. But it's like, if you're not dying like for Jesus, stop talking. That's my personal opinion. Like, don't tell me I'm not one or never was one if you aren't actually dying for it.
This martyrdom is really interesting because it brings up the notion of both of these entities, whatever Christ is, Jesus is, whatever Osiris is, God, man, a little bit of both. They're both facing injustice, and they're both there standing in the face of injustice, and they're naive. They're going towards it with open eyes. Is that the same thing? They're trusting in the people around them, but they also offer up their body to the injustice. And it brings up a Buddhist element, which has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about, but is the only way that I can describe it. It's this sacrifice to the human element of samsara, that there's always going to be this chaos, suffering, pain, and that both Osiris and Jesus know that this is an element of the world. It's an inescapable thing. And they willingly offer themselves up to it. And there, I think you see some comparisons. It's interesting also that you bring up this idea that you have to die to be a true Christian, because Christianity takes hold, this cult of Jesus really takes hold in a time period when the Roman Empire is just wreaking havoc throughout the ancient Mediterranean world, and in which life becomes very, very cheap, in which people can be enslaved for just being invaded, in which there is all kinds of elite replacement and massive social transformation. And so this idea of sacrificing your body for something greater is attractive for many people for whom life was shit anyway.
Yeah.
And so this, if you're going to question my faith, or you need me to do the imperial cult or whatever it is, there were many people, it seems, who were willing to make that sacrifice themselves because life was really tough out there. It's most interesting, these martyrdom stories, when you read about the wealthy elites who decide to give their lives to Christ and refuse to renounce. The poor, it makes more sense. The slave, it makes more sense, right? But
Right.
that's why I think so many of the more attractive martyrdom stories are, the very elite Roman woman who found Jesus in the basements of other people's churches and found Christ, and then put herself to that suffering to become the true Christian that you're talking about. So, yeah.
You mentioned earlier the body, the grain comes back, and I wonder if whether they believed it in the Western way we perceive, of course, literally, or if they're kind of seeing nature do its thing, and that was enough evidence for them to see the God at work. If there's some overlap when we start looking into the Jesus narrative, because what we've done in modern debate amongst those who are literal believers in the literal historical approach that we see is they will make the claim that we have no better claims for anything in the ancient world other than the miracles of Jesus, meaning this one story that gets, replicated in gospels we have within the canon. You could say extra biblical material, etc. There's nothing in the ancient world that has this much credibility, this much speaking on it. And I'm thinking ancient Egypt, like how many hieroglyphics, how much praise was there for Osiris? How often did they really practice and worship and believe this in their own day of actively participating in the religion, however they may have done it? Because we like to think of mental assent, believe, but that's like anachronistic maybe from what they did.
I love this question because you're materializing religion, which is what Christianity does, the cult of Jesus does, in my opinion, out of Judaism. So if you think of your Hebrew Bible and you think of what God is a voice from the heavens. God is a burning bush. God is very disembodied. God is not there in a material form. It's and all of the material forms are torn down. You're not supposed to have the pillars. You're not supposed to have a bull. You're not supposed to have an icon. You're meant to tear those icons down and burn them, destroy them. You're not supposed to physicalize divinity, according to the Hebrew Bible. Egypt is the exact opposite. Divinity is always physicalized. And if you're talking about how the Egyptians then celebrated Osiris, yes, there were yearly celebrations at Abydos where you have Wep-Wawet festivals that show his resurrection from the dead, that are burial festivals. They even had festivals about the martyrdom, if you want to call it that, or the murder, and things that they play acted out. And I don't mean play acted to make it silly, but play acted in a very serious and sober way to reenact how this works. But think about those chief elements that you read in your gospel of Jesus saying, take this bread, this is my body. Right. Take this blood, this wine, it is my blood. And it is materialized in a way that you don't have in a Jewish tradition. No Hebrew Bible elements are going to physicalize in that way. You might have some burnt offerings and things like that. You have some altars, but you're not physicalizing God. This new cult takes a little bit of Egypt, or a lot, depending on your perspective, and it makes God edible. It makes God drinkable. It makes God something that you can put into your own body. The Egyptians had magic, deep traditions of magic, where if you wanted a spell to work, you would write it out on a papyrus, write your spell, like, may my mother survive this fever, or whatever. You would take that papyrus and you would dissolve the ink in a cup of beer, and you would have your mother drink that beer. These ideas, they began in Egypt, and then they were brought to other parts of the world. So drinking a religious idea, or drinking a potency, drinking God's power, is something that the Egyptians had invented, I would say, a good millennium before you get any of this Jesus cult idea of drinking divinity or eating divinity. And when you look at an Egyptian temple, like say we went to Abydos, we went to the temple of Osiris built by Seti I, which is my favorite temple in the whole world. And all of your listeners, if you're going to go to Egypt, you can go to this temple space at Abydos. Getting there is a little bit tricky, and you sometimes need a tour to do it, or be on a Nile cruise boat to get there. But if you do, you go into this space, it's a limestone cut temple, and all of the color is fully intact, and almost fully intact. And you see a cult to Osiris that can be consumed and that is celebrated on a yearly, daily basis. So you have certain festivals throughout the year. But say you go into the Osiris chapel in the back, in the most sacred part, and you will see there a big menu for the god. And the menu is what you feed the god to awaken him. And you feed him milk, and then you feed him a little bit of bread, and then you feed him certain cakes, and then you feed him meat, and you're waking the god up from his slumber of death. But this idea of consuming things so you can be strong, so you can take your divinity in, so you can take your power in, this is a very Egyptian thing. And so that very Eucharist idea, the eating of the body, is, I would argue, something that comes directly from Egypt.
This is powerful. Can we get a like from everybody in the chat? 423 people watching. I seriously am loving this, Dr. Cooney. And it makes me feel like it's actually a slap in the face when apologists act like they got the thing and it's only them. What are your thoughts about that? It's in the vein of what
I wrote a lot about this in the chapter on Akhenaten in the Good Kings, because I wanted to discuss how religion misuses, or how politics misuses religion. So for those of you watching this who are like, oh my God, she's a Christian hater, or this is horrible. My perspective is not to take down Christianity as it is perceived in the Gospels, as it's depicted in that more direct form, though the Gospels are certainly by no means direct from Jesus to us. Right. And there's lots of research about that. But when Christianity is misused as a tool of power, that's where I step in and I say, this thing that you speak of that is perfectly fresh and new, that came from the Word of God, and that's your mechanism of getting people to believe it, or they will go to the fires of hell, and all of the things that I was taught, and I presume that you were taught. Yep. It's a method of keeping people in line. It's a method of keeping people within a patriarchal society as good soldiers of whatever crusade that they are meant to fight. That's where I'll push back and say, this isn't against the Gospels of Jesus. Most of the things in the Gospels of Jesus are wonderful socialist causes of redistributing wealth and giving to the poor, and not living in a world of ancient Roman late capitalist decadence. I think there are some comparisons here. So that's what I would push back against. And it's that person on the internet, that apologist who's using Christianity in that way. That's what I want to push against. So yeah, you can look at the Hebrew Bible and see ancient Mesopotamian tradition very clearly. You can look at Psalm 104 and see that Akhenaten had a hand in writing Psalm 104 before it was put in the Hebrew Bible. It's an Egyptian king. And you can look at the Jesus cult and this idea of a God who is resurrected in a springtime to show the new harvest, and you eat his body and you drink his blood. These all have Egyptian or ancient polytheistic antecedents.
I want to express, this is like raw. This is very authentic. What I'm expressing here. You said it better than I could. And it's very difficult in my seat where I'm at to be even-handed when I'm criticizing Christianity. And part of me thinks that to solve that solution of the power struggle we're finding, I get the inspiration of the text, the mythos, the legend, or the narrative, and the life it gives for some people in terms of its excitement and powerful morality that can come out of some of this stuff. But for me, I criticize and I poke holes, and because I feel like sometimes you got to sweep the rug out from underneath this power system. And most people aren't just going to go to some less strict power structure type of Christianity. They need to see, hey, this is just another system that men have developed, and they're trying to express the world around them. That there's belief attached to these things and all. But I don't want to take away all their toys to play with, because we have a world of mythos. We do it with Capcom and Marvel and all these fictions we create today that give us excitement. People who actually follow Star Wars, there's cults around Star Wars, things like that. I don't want to take away the toys, but I feel like sometimes you in order to fight it, you're almost having to show how man-made the whole thing is. And then a lot of people feel like, well, you're making me feel like I need to deconvert.
I would put it in this way, in the same way that, religion aside, if you're talking about taking down white supremacy, which the United States was based on in every way, shape, or form, from taking Native American land to using Black bodies to build everything in this country without pay. Right? If you're taking down white supremacy and you go to a white person of power and you say, we need to rebalance this, they'll use victimization and say, I didn't enslave anyone. This was not me who did this. How dare you come after me? It's reverse racism or whatever. And you have a victimization. Where was this learned? I would argue that Christianity came about in a time of extraordinary cruelty decadent late stage imperialism of Rome, in which things were really bad for a lot of people, and you had a very unequal class situation. Christianity finds its footing in that world and gives a mass of people something to hope for and a power in this world that they did not have before. And it helps them to find a way to square themselves with their victimization and use it as a weapon of power, of social power. When Christianity is linked up with white supremacy, which we have done in the United States with abandon and skill, then you create a white supremacy that uses the victimization of Christianity with impunity, saying that we are doing what is right, we are doing what is good, and thus we are unattackable, we are unassailable. And this theology, this thinking, these perspectives can then be brought out into the world, and you have people in the highest positions of power, from the Supreme Court to Congress to other parts of government or church leaders, who then say, you are victimizing my rights when you try to change society. So Christianity is so powerful because it's a cult of change, to create social change against the haves in the ancient world. And who were the haves in the ancient world? They were the Pharisees in the ancient Jewish world. They were the Stoics of the ancient Greek world. They were all kinds of different people who said, you're born into this slave and you will die in it. And this is what we have, and just know your place. You have to be born to be a priest,
like
right?
The Herodians and those who ruled and such.
Yes. And Christianity blows that shit up. And that's why it's so powerful. The reason it continues to be powerful is because it can be used by a dominant class group and then weaponized on behalf of everybody to keep people in line by claiming somehow, some way that we are victimized still. And so then when anybody comes and says, look, Christianity is this beautiful, amazing thing, as it is written in the Gospels and many other texts. Revelation's like a very cool, awesome text, right? Scary. But if you look at the polytheistic roots, it's a different sort of thing. Or if you look at the cruel Roman Empire in which it is embedded, and the resistance in which it is embedded into, then, okay, Revelation is a completely different meaning. But when it's weaponized to get people to do what they're supposed to, and to take on binary gender roles, to take on traditional marriage roles, to take on forced birth, et cetera, then it's a misuse of it, which is why so many of us are discussing things like, is Osiris Jesus? It doesn't really matter. Yeah. It only matters to those people who are using it to say, this is the word of God and you have to do what I say. Of course, Osiris and Jesus are coming from the same idea and the same seasons and the same human condition. Of course they are. But the apologists are going to be in there going, no, and then start splitting the hairs and getting into the details. And what about this particular text? Because that's where the argumentation for this kind of dominant power works best.
Yeah, and it gets you so muddied into the gray areas of, can we really be so confident that what that one thing says? And then they do it 100 times over. Next thing you know, you don't know what you're talking about after a while. You're kind of going like, what? And instead of using kind of an airplane view heuristic approach of saying, look at the comparative mythologies around the world, they all have a ubiquitous experience of life, birth, death, the whole nine. We see common themes, tropes, whether they're genealogically connected or not. This seems to be a common theme. Yours somehow is unique and true. And especially when it's birthed right there in surrounding elites who are writing about Caesars and stuff, having portents of their births. I bring this up all the time, and having apotheosis ascension narratives for Romulus, all the above. They like, oh, nope, just this one. Nope, screw that. I don't care. That's not true. They high five us when those are talked about as legend. Then you get to theirs and it's like, oh no.
So what
that power?
What I would then, because of the power, that's what I would focus on, because the Osiris Jesus part is obvious. Both are gods of bread. Both have a material body that can be murdered. Both die for injustice. Both are reborn again. Both bring the spring new harvest. Both can be eaten. Both, I mean, you can go on. But and then if you conflate the Horus into it, both are held by their mother on her lap. There is the divine birth in both of these stories. But where is the point when the Christian is like, how dare you come after this? You're going after the power of it being new, different, unique, something that is unassailable. When you're combining it with everything else in the world, then that power suddenly dissipates into thin air and it is nothing. And that's where the fear comes from. But I think so many people in this world are now seeing all of those things. And it's an interesting time to be alive.
It is. And that, like you said, that power, when that perception I had dissipated and it went away, there was a serious freedom in not knowing. Like, I know it sounds scary. A lot of people go, well, if I don't know, I'm scared. I need that comfort. And we've been taught you need to know the answer in order to find comfort. For me, I found a sense of relief of saying maybe there is hope in the fact that this isn't true. I know that sounds funny. Like Christians go, no, this is true. I found hope in resurrection. I'm thinking in the real world we live in, because if we can break down those walls and see each other as humans I see you as a human who needs my message. But you're just another human who's trying to live life and enjoy life. I think there's a lot more common ground that we can do. And that's why I love bringing up Osiris with you today, because this God was an OG resurrected deity that was taken serious for millennia. Yeah. Just like Jesus is, according to Christians.
And he had a competing cult at the same time that the Jesus cult was spreading throughout the Mediterranean, because his competing cult was the Isis cult. And if you read your Apuleius story about transformation, called the Golden Ass or called Metamorphosis, depending on which you're reading, you read about this man who's living this banal and sad life of prostitutes and drinking and hanging out with rich people, and he gets bored and he finds this Isis cult and he is initiated into this cult, and he finally gets to the end stages and he realizes that it is Osiris, the mystery at the end of it. That cult was mega popular in ancient Rome throughout the Mediterranean, and not just the city of Rome, but the whole empire of Rome. And it's very much competing with this Jesus cult. There's Mithras cults. Everyone was trying to find what's the purpose, what's the source. And it's a relief to know that we have so much more in common as human beings rather than we have differences. I grew up probably like you did, being told, oh, those poor people are going to go to hell and they don't know. And I remember having a discussion. I was pretty young, probably like 10 or 11. And my friend told me, oh, all the Indians are going to go to hell because they're Hindus or don't believe in, Jesus Christ. She probably thought I was going to go to hell because she was an evangelical and I lived in Texas and I was a Catholic, which is like being Jewish in Alabama, right? At least in the 70s, it was. I'm a Gen Xer. And I remember telling her, you really believe that all of these Hindus are going to burn in hell? And she looks at me, oh, yes, oh, yes. And that pain of going through life, of looking at all of these other people and saying, you're going to burn and you're going to burn and you're going to burn. How exhausting. It grants you a whole lot of power in a political, social way, and you feel superior and all of these things. When that goes away, that superiority is gone and you're just like everybody else. How frightening for some people who have built their lives on a mythology that does not exist, or is a mythology like everyone else's mythology. And I'd rather be there with everybody else rather than consider myself something special.
Me too. There's the psychological damage that comes with that fear as well of what if, and how people are trapped in still thinking, if I die, unending fire. And there's literal like times in which people will put their kids' hands over a stove, let them feel the flame and say, that hurt, didn't it? And it's like an unbearable pain for just a split second. And then they go, imagine forever and ever God doing this to you. And you cannot tell me, especially with children, but I think period, this whole idea is abuse. There's no other way around it. I cannot see it for anything else.
So I just bought this book and I'm looking over to the side, and it's called A Brief History of Christianity, Cult of the Dead. And it likens Christianity to a death cult that you belong to, or you will be lost to the fires of hell. And may I be so bold and provocative as to claim that the ancient Egyptians invented hell first. Because if you look at Book of the Dead and you read about the people who didn't do things right in the ways of the gods, didn't pass the tribunal, they have to eat excrement instead of food. They have to drink urine instead of water. They live upside down. They live an existence that is harsh and cruel. If you look at the Book of Gates or other books of the underworld, you see people who are roasting in pots for forever. And the Egyptians were very inventive about what you would do with an enemy who was working against the king, working against the sun god, a rebel against what was Ma'at and what was true. The ancient Egyptians invented this idea of using theology, if you want to use a big word, using religion to impose upon people, you do what the state says to be right, or you are roasted alive for forever. So Christians are just taking that on from Egypt, arguably too. This idea of a hell that goes on forever.
There's so many things. We've got some super chats I want to get into, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Gnostic informant, thoughts on Isis and her connections with other deities like Persephone, Demeter, Ishtar. Is it possible that Luke is drawing from the divine childbirth scene of Horus?
Yeah, I think the divine child of Horus is an absolute connection to the birth story of Jesus. And we have to remember that the birth story of Jesus, and again, I'll put in the, like when you're listening to a talk show and they're like, I'm not a doctor, so consult your doctor. So I do this every time we talk about Christianity and say, I'm not a New Testament scholar, so consult your New Testament scholar. However, when you're looking at the story of Jesus's birth, it only appears in Luke. It doesn't appear in the other Gospels. It's a later story. It's an unusual story. And it has the Star of Bethlehem, and which is probably a meteor or something, or maybe a supernova. I've heard all kinds of discussions of what this star could be. But it's the birth of a God that is foretold. And the idea of this divine birth is something that you absolutely see in an Egyptian religious understanding, that the God creates himself. The woman is just a vessel. The God puts his divine spirit, his Ka, if you like, his Ka spirit into the woman, and thereby she gives birth to the next God. And you have this understanding of a divine birth, not necessarily a virgin birth, but a divine birth, that the God creates himself as the sun god, he impregnates his own mother with his own future self. There's a version of the god Amun-Re, a solar chthonic god, who is called Amun-Kamutef, which means Amun, bull of his mother, which might freak us out. And we're like, oh dear, Amun is the god having sex with his own mother. And yet that's kind of what the Jesus cult is doing when they say there's a virgin birth, because the God is having sex with the mother, and he is Jesus in material, physicalized form, right? That's what we're taught. The God is not separate from Jesus. Jesus is the same as God. I mean, that mystery is hard to wrap one's head around, but that's kind of what we're expected to believe. And that in and of itself is Egyptian, it's cyclical, and it connects with all of the polytheistic traditions that I learn about in Egyptology.
I know for a fact the nitpicky people who want to try and obviously pick out the details will say, actually, it wasn't a sexual union, right? But it's the idea that the God overshadows and through the pneuma and the power impregnates her. And we have one non-canonical text where the spirit enters through Mary's ear. And the idea in Greek for audio or to listen, she was so faithful and loyal and listening to God that he entered his spirit through her ear to impregnate her in one of those texts. But the point is like other scholars have pointed out, M. David Little and others that are specifically in this region of time specialty, they'll say it wasn't sexual, but the implication is kind of there, because you see even in Plutarch, when he talks about Plato's birth, he says that the God, through the power of the God, the God's pneuma impregnated Plato's mother, getting her pregnant. So this is why they say the virgin conception kind of thing makes sense, because the God's not having actual sexual intercourse, but it's almost like a fossil. The idea is a fossil from what the ancient gods, physical gods, would do, is literally have sex with women, mortal women, and impregnate them.
Well, then take the sex out of it, because you can use another ancient Egyptian text, and you can Google this one called the Shabaka stone, Shabaka, or you could put a Q in there. It's also spelled the Shabako stone. And this dates to around 650 BCE, maybe like 680 BCE. And this, I've mentioned this before, speaking with you just now, the god Ptah of Memphis, he formulates in his mind what he wants to create. he speaks it. And through the magic, Holy Spirit, anyone? Through the magic, the Heka, it comes into being. And he creates himself this way. And then he creates all of the other elements in this way. The Egyptians also had an understanding of a more cognitive, cerebral, thoughtful understanding of creation. Didn't always have to be super sexual. But then you have some of these images, these early antique images of Mary being impregnated, and you'll see the Holy Spirit coming into her body or going into her womb as a golden light.
Right.
That's perfect. That's a perfect understanding of a Ka power moving from the divinity into the body of someone else. And there's another series of texts that are even older. They're more sexual, but it works. There are two kings that depict this, the female king Hatshepsut and then Amenhotep III. And they give a story about how their mother was in her bed resting, and then the god Amun-Re visited her and had sex with her. And they explain the sexual encounter, but she's having sex with the god. And then she's impregnated with that god, and the next king that is born is of that god's essence. He is divine. So I would also argue that the way the birth or the conception of Jesus is depicted kind of like the king's conception is described in Bronze Age texts and late Bronze Age texts for the female king Hatshepsut and for Amenhotep III. Take the sex out, and otherwise the similarities are striking.
Yeah, what does overshadow mean, right? Like, one might say, oh, that just means he hovered over her. But you could see a man overshadowing a woman. It's almost like saying Adam knew Eve. What do you mean he knew her? Well, that's a euphemism for he had sex with her and got her pregnant. So it could be. I'm just throwing out there like what some of the academics will try to say is that it may not be sexual. But you brought up some excellent points, really excellent. Before we continue on Super Chats, I told you we were going to wait till we got a bunch of people watching to make this mention. We have a vote you can vote at right now, letting us know if you've ever purchased any of Dr. Kara Cooney's books. Don't be ashamed. Be honest. If it's a no, it's a no. My hope is you'll take the time to get a copy. She has her books. And might as well share the screen. Show everybody real quick here. Your website, and we're going to continue here in just a moment. karacooney.squarespace.com in the description. Your books, The Good Kings, The Woman Who Would Be King, and When Women Ruled the World. They're on Audible, so you can listen to them, and you can get a paperback, hardback copy. Either way, go check them out. You've also done Ancient Female Rulers right here. This is, what is this?
That's an Audible original, that one.
Okay.
And it's many episodes. That's a lot of fun. It's based on a class that I did at UCLA.
Well, we got to tease people about that class thing. Come May 1st. So everybody who's watching, mark your calendars. I'm going to be recording at least one, hopefully 2 courses with Dr.
Let's see how good I am.
Right? So you can participate with the courses, mvpcourses.com. I've already got 4 or 5 courses already up here on the website. You can sign up for it. Be ready. We're bringing the fire. Okay, we're coming back. Dr. Cooney, I hope that people will get your books because that's what brings you back to the YouTube world and to come and join me and Gnostic Informant, anyone else that is interviewing people on the YouTube world, especially when the courses come out. You'll be able to show face, and we'll just try to promote it to educate more people. And you'll be showing up all over the YouTube world, I'm sure, when that time comes. So you're blowing my mind, just so you know. And it's really amazing.
I mean, I'm thrilled. It's not that for an Egyptologist, it's like, yeah, duh. You see Horus sitting in Isis's lap, and then you see an image of Mary holding the baby Jesus, and it's just obvious. The breastfeeding scenes are obvious. That mother-son connection, it's obvious. And, it fills me with joy that Christianity, for all of its claims of monotheism, was never able to kick out the divine feminine. I love that.
That is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really good point. Logan Fisher, when Judah was a vassal state of Egypt, was Osiris venerated by proto-Christians, or was it less specific and they mostly stole themes? I don't know if stole is the right word, but I did that for the title just to give you still.
I mean, Logan, let's say it's hard to know how religions come about. It's hard to know how these things are created. One of the best movies that I've ever seen that helps me to understand the creation of a particular religion that we call Christianity is The Life of Brian. And if you haven't seen it, Derek, have you seen The Life of Brian? Monty Python's Life of Brian?
Blessed are the cheesemakers.
Okay, good. So there's this scene where you're walking through the streets of Jerusalem and there are all these different prophets who are channeling God. And it's awesome. And there are times in this world when there is a great deal of doubt and great change, social change, and people are trying to figure out what is happening in their lives, what's happening in their world. Nothing makes people believers in the gods more than crisis and trauma. And what do they say? There's no atheist in a foxhole, right? Try living in ancient late imperial Rome, and I believe it would be the same foxhole. So how do these ideas travel? I would say that when people pick up on certain religious beliefs, and stealing's an interesting word, that word implies that there's some sort of a non-stolen religion out there. I would argue that all human religion is earth-based, based on our animist understandings of the river and the sky and the thunder, and is based on the seasons and what we eat, and it's based on sexual cycles and living and dying, and we all have the same general religion. But when people are in that foxhole of life, they're looking to those things that help them to square the problems that they have. There is no better mythology than an Osiris mythology, where a god can be brutally, literally cut down by his very powerful brother, and then be brought back to life through the loving hands of his wife to create a child after him. That brings comfort to people, who have just held their dying baby in their arms and have had to put them in a pot and put them underneath the floor of their home. That Osiris ritual gives you a comfort that there is something to come. And so any of these religious traditions that are borrow is not even the right word, that are taken, that are claimed, that are believed in fervently. Yeah. I think that they all have great power to them. I would argue that there's attempts to make things seem unstolen, to make things seem pure. And one way of doing that is to disassociate with certain more overt elements of a particular story, which is why I think the Christian Jesus story removes sexuality from its different actions and components. Then you say, oh no, it's completely different. This is not like the Osiris story at all. But Derek, I already mentioned in the last time we discussed that both Osiris and Jesus are emasculated in a way. Both of them have this sexless experience of being a sacrifice of their body, but then not getting to have a home and a family. They have to sacrifice that body to be able to create that child. And they have this rather emasculated, manly self. That makes sense.
Yeah. Before I take the next super chat, I just want to highlight something I always found kind of odd about New Testament theology, and that is the bride of Christ. Mm-hmm. You are the bride of Christ. Very strange in this kind of supposed very patriarchal system in this early Christian movement, which I think wrestled between women being apostles and then them condemning them, trying the political move to shut women down, shut them up, be silent, ask your husband, become baby-making machines. The only way to salvation is you pop out children. We see this in the pastorals. You run into that issue, but like becoming the bride of Christ. Christ is obviously the penetrated one on the cross, which is a very demasculine thing. Rome penetrated him through crucifixion, which was a known thing of conquering someone. It's like an act of rape, but publicly to death, of course. And then he overcomes this.
Can I stop you really fast? Go ahead. Remember that little thing, but I want everyone to start Googling medieval Christian images of Jesus's wound in his side. They look just like a vagina, a vulva. If you don't believe me, please Google it. And there's little votives, there's little bronzes, there's all of these little images that make that wound in his side into a vaginal opening. So you tell me that there's no sexuality in the Gospels, but the way it's actually celebrated and understood by Christian pilgrims in early medieval times is in a very sexual way. And the divine feminine is there on his body. And this was just all over Twitter recently. And it's something medieval scholars are like, oh yeah, duh. But I didn't know about. And when I saw that, I went, holy shit, that's the coolest thing that I've ever seen.
I have never heard of this. I'm popping it up for everybody just to see if we're onto something. Look at how obvious that is.
Yeah.
I mean, why are they highlighting it? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's wonderful. It's just wonderful. Look at that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I never knew that. I always
so
thought
people have thought of what you're saying, but they didn't try to use that divine feminine to disassociate it from any sort of Christian or trying to make it less polytheistic, because that wasn't even something that was popping into people's brains. These things were the divine feminine was something you could discuss. So then God and Mary and the divine feminine and birth, all of these things are mashed together into the material body of Christ. And that's crazy. That's some super interesting theology right there. But anyway, I'm sorry, you had a good point.
Never apologize for interrupting me, but you are the one I want to hear from more than me, and I'm sure everyone's the same. I love that what you just brought up, and it makes me think of the body of Christ, number one. Mm-hmm. So while they talk about being the bride, they're also the body of Christ. Yeah. They have ingested him, which there's like two requirements, it seems, in Pauline theology. Being baptized is absolutely necessary to be part of the cult, to be in Christ, and also the participation of the Lord's Supper, which is the digestion of the God, ingesting, like drinking and eating of the God.
Yeah.
That makes you the body of this Christ, part of that, which means you are him, but you're also his bride, which makes me kind of think of this feminine, masculine, Isis, Osiris kind of connection, if there's something to it.
Yeah.
And that's in Paul. That's like, if we wanted to say Paul is not the mythology, so to speak, I think it is still mythological. I think theology plays mythological tropes, but I'm talking about narratives. It's non-narrative necessarily, but it has this concept that, what do you make of that as someone who's an Egyptologist?
Paul's a mess, and you can read your Karen Armstrong book about real Pauls and pseudo Pauls and all of those things. It's a good starting point. Paul would be, in my idea, again, I'm not a New Testament scholar, but the institutionalization of Christianity, right? The beginnings of that institutionalization. But, if I'm going to think of another parallel for all of this eating and drinking and taking into the body, or being the bride of Christ, let me bring in this idea that the Egyptians were very keen on presenting, and that's uniting or melding with God. There's this female king, Hatshepsut, and pretty famous amongst Egyptologists, not as famous among most people, but she's badass, and I love her, and I've written 2 books that use her as a centerpiece. But she has a name that she takes on when she becomes king. And that name is the one who is melded or united with the god Amun. And so this idea of being a normal person and then somehow like mind melding or just kind of connecting with a god, this is a very Egyptian notion. And so to do this in a Christian sense by eating, and these are Egyptian things, absolutely. So a woman can do it, a man can do it, and that all works, that you can take that Eucharist into you and you somehow become one with Christ, right? You take him into your body, but you have to do so on a regular basis. It's a temporary thing. It's not like one and done. It's a constant, which is also very Egyptian, right? It's not a very Hebrew thing. Hebrews are often, and then God created the world and it's done. Egyptian mythological creation is a constant. It has to always be updated. It has to always be fed. And so this idea of people continuing to take in the bread is also a cyclical Egyptian sort of thing. Now, the bride of Christ thing, when you take sexuality out of a story, everyone's having sex in the world. Everyone's creating babies with sex. Sex in the antique and medieval and modern worlds it's all around us. So you have this religion that removes sex, and yet it's there in code. people are going to put it in some way, shape, or form, so that it's a way they're going to put it back in. It was there before, and then it was taken out to differentiate, arguably, from what it was, and then they're just adding that normal human behavior back in. I think it's a real problem when in the 10th century you have these ideas that you have to be celibate to be a good Christian, to be the best Christian, to be the Christian that really connects. Obviously there's pushback against all of those things too, but celibacy is that'll mess with you.
One more little comment that I want to make about what you said there about the body of Christ is that we're new creations. You talked about the cyclical thing, and it's not the Jewish idea. Isn't it interesting how that language gets used for the early cults, the early Christ cult, where we are the new creations, we're new creatures, right? So, and how do you maintain that? Like you said, keep eating and drinking your God, and you'll be a good old Christian. So,
on a weekly basis, you've got to be doing. If you're really good, on a daily basis, it's got to be something that you keep up with. Very Egyptian, that you've got to re-up your connection with divinity. Sorry, you had a chat up. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Atheologica, thank you for that super chat, Derek Bennett. The Dendera temple shows Osiris's corpse rising to an upright position. Some say this occurred in the netherworld, thus it is not resurrection. Reply.
See, this is exactly what you said, Derek, that the Christian apologist will take a tiny detail and say, it didn't happen in this place, and thus it's not the same thing. I deal with a lot of the same things with the LDS church, because the Latter-day Saints church uses an Egyptian book of breathing, a late Roman version of the Book of the Dead. And Joseph Smith took this and then claimed that he could read the Book of Abraham from it and translated all of these texts. And there are Mormon apologists who then say, oh, you can't, this in the Egyptian text is exactly what's in the Mormon text. And there's a lot of the same sorts of detail arguments. So getting back to your question, I mean, if that's going to really throw out the whole argument for you that one happened in the netherworld and the other happened in a tomb, I don't know. But from the Gospels that I know of, Jesus is in this hole in the ground, very netherworldly place. It's a cave. I mean, the German word for cave is Hölle, and it's like a hell, and it's an underground place. I don't know the Hebrew, so we could check and look and see what that word means. Again, I'm not a New Testament scholar, and these are going to be in Greek too. So I don't know what the Greek word for the cave is that he's in. Could be something that your listeners could check into, look at some etymology. But the duat for the ancient Egyptians it's a complicated place, and Osiris's resurrection can take place in that duat. It can also take place in an underground chthonic sort of realm. And the Egyptians didn't have like particular places where these things needed to happen. It could be an underground cave where he resurrects himself, like Philae Temple, and then you see the new floodwaters coming forth from that resurrection. It could happen in the duat, the space that is neither earth nor sky. It's inside of the mother goddess, so it's kind of inside of a womb or cave-like space. So I actually think that the comparisons work better than they don't. What do you think?
Look, what came to my mind? I went over there to the Holy Land, right? And I took the tour and I went to the places the Gospels say Jesus went. And one of those places was Caesarea Philippi. One of my favorite places we didn't get to spend enough time at with my good friend James Tabor. He's another New Testament scholar, and Neil, Gnostic Informant. You've interviewed with him. This is what this little spot here, it's like a cave. There's even an inscription stone here. That's probably some tour that took these pictures. But on the left, let's look at this one. On the left, you see behind these people on the left here, there's actually a cave. This cave where water, a natural spring of water comes up and down. And they call this the portal to Hades. So this is actually a portal to the underworld. Technically, a cave could be the underworld in a way. Okay. And this is where I think
absolutely it could be. I mean, it's as clear as day, in my opinion. Right. Yeah.
This isn't a stretch. Yeah. Even modern Christian sects have said, like, well, when Jesus died, he went to hell for 3 days and 3 nights and overcame the devil. You're fine.
No, this is my kid. Everyone gets to hear me listen to my kid. Jules,
feel free.
Pick me up from here and drive me to Phillips, right?
Yes, I can drive you to Phillips, but I'm on a podcast live with like a whole bunch of people and I gotta go.
Okay, bye.
Okay, love you. Bye. Okay, bye.
That's awesome.
And I had do not disturb on, Derek, so I don't understand. I'm so sorry.
Osiris and Isis wanted this to happen. Let's just keep it honest.
Can I add a little to that cave thing? So
yes, let me share that again.
This is really cool. This where do the dead go when they die? Most religious traditions of West Asia or the Eastern Mediterranean or the Mediterranean as a whole are going to say they go into this Hades-like space. They go into an underworld-like space. You change that with Christianity, where you go into your tomb and then you're supposed to go into a space that, well, you're supposed to be risen up, right? I went into my son's rooms. We're talking about my son. And I said, oh, you've been raptured, because he had his clothes, when your clothes are there and the underwear is inside of the jeans. And it's exactly like if you've been lifted up into the heavens. So you go up into the sky. This Christian idea of being lifted up into the heavens, or of Jesus, being raptured up into the heavens, and he doesn't go into the underworld. It differentiates where you go. This is a big Christian thing. You don't go to hell anymore. If you're a Christian, you don't go into the underworld. Dante has written a lot about this, I dare say. And you instead go up into the heavens and you get to be with God in a different way than the polytheistic dead beforehand. You could also argue, the ancient Egyptians, they go into the underworld. They go into a space, into the ground in a sense. And they get to see the sun when he moves through. But the Egyptians arguably invented this too, because the very special dead, the Ahu, the deads who become effective, the dead ones who are the kind of superhero dead, they get to go onto the bark of millions, which moves through the night, the tunnels of night, and then rises in the east and goes through the entire light given sky. And so the dead get to go into the heavens too in the Egyptian conception of things. And it's not the first time that you see this in any sort of religious tradition. The Egyptians arguably invented that as well.
1 Corinthians 15, the immortalization of flesh into the celestial bodies and such, and that you get a new glorified celestial body. And look at the story about Julius Caesar. How his apotheosis happens. Of course, Augustus or Octavian has to say, hey, that comet, that's my dad. Okay, that's Julius Caesar. He's becoming a god, meaning he's becoming a celestial. So it's obviously ubiquitous in the Greco-Roman world that's how they understood the divinization to take place. And Christians think that way. Eastern Orthodox still has this kind of becoming divinized idea, whereas Western Christianity wants to kind of divorce that idea. Let's keep moving. Joey, we want to try and wrap through these, actually. I'm going to stop. No more super chat questions, because Dr. Cooney, I got to keep this relationship really, really on kosher terms, okay? She cannot go, man, he's abusing me every time I come on.
Well, and my son's just going to call again. So it's, right. We'll see. Let's see how we do.
Let's try to get through these. Please respect that. That's all I ask. I really do love talking with you and learning from you. I know everyone watching has enjoyed it. Hit the like button. Press 1 in the chat right now if you're loving this. Share this out. Get her books. We're going to close at the end, and I'll show you how many votes we have no or yes on Bought Your Book. But let's do that. So Joey says,
and happy Easter, right?
Exactly. Sorry, I was going to have you at the end do something where you can Pandora's box, and hope being the last thing left in it equals the hope that the idea of the resurrection gives to Christians when nothing else in their violent lives made sense anymore.
Yeah. This is Hesiod. This is it 6th century BCE? It's an old text, and this Pandora's box arguably predates Hesiod having written it down. And you can check the date of Hesiod again. I'm not a classicist, but this hope is this. First of all, the misogyny is something that I think that is taken up with Paul or pseudo Paul or whoever all the Pauls were with abandon in many of the letters that we have preserved in our New Testament. And the Pandora, the female that is the root of sin and evil in the world. Yes, these things predate your stories in the Hebrew Bible and in Genesis as well, but it fits with this Greek tradition. Hope
like Tiamat.
is
Tiamat, the feminine dragon sea creature. It's a female, of course. Again.
Yeah, no, there are all kinds of understandings in an agricultural society that discord and pain has a female identity. And you didn't arguably have this before you had an agricultural patriarchal world. That's a big point that I just made, and I'd love for people to fight me on that, but I'll stand my ground for now. Hope is, I would say that's a potential pre-Christian idea. There's all kinds of pre-Christian ideas in Christianity. And again, seeing the origins of Christianity in a polytheistic tradition beforehand, I think does not discount the powerful moral imposition to do what is right and good in the Gospels. By no means, it just says that people were doing many of these things and believing many of these things beforehand until they were repackaged and re-promoted in a new cult form. And I'm not using cult in a derogatory way. I'm using cult as a practice, as what people do in a religion that is a living religion, rather than something just that you believe. You do it.
Yeah, and there can be overlap to both, but that the definition can be bad too. Mr. Monster says, did Egyptians celebrate a sort of Easter for Osiris?
The Egyptians celebrated so many things for Osiris, and we have texts going back to at least the Middle Kingdom that talk about pageantry and plays and different festivals that help the Egyptians to deal with the fact that Osiris was murdered and really internalize, and I'm using that word purposefully, what that meant, what that means for them. When Jesus or Osiris is murdered, it means that we all suffer with him. This sympathy that we have for this cycle is something we all go through. You and I, Derek, were taught that Jesus died for our sins, and then we have to somehow feel the guilt of that association. In the ancient world or an agricultural world, everyone is suffering alongside Jesus with this mythology because they go through the winter. They go through the time period when the wheat stores are running low. They go through time periods of drought. They're going through time periods when you have to deal with there not being enough to eat, of pandemic, when people are dying all around them. We've just been through one, or arguably still going through one. But this idea of pain and suffering being something that only Jesus is bearing, I think is rather modern. And that if you push things back in time to contexts when humans are dealing with more pain in their life, then suffering with Jesus is something that it's not something you have to force people to do necessarily. It's something that people are all naturally doing. So in the Egyptian world, they're suffering the rising of the floodwaters. They know what it will bring, this rich earth. But meanwhile, they got to move all their houses. It's destroying the houses that are in low land, which is for everybody poor. They've got to all live huddled together in these high areas that aren't flooded, or move out into desert areas. It's a lot of work. And then they sit there and they watch the floodwaters, and they're probably drinking a lot of beer and having a lot of sex. And what happens? But these Osirian rituals rise up, and also festivals and pageantry, so that people can deal with their boredom, deal with what they need, what they want to do when the waters recede. This is how we mark time. It's how we mark when we're supposed to plant, when we mark when we're supposed to harvest. And all of these things were part of the Egyptian world as much as anything else. Osiris is a grain god. Jesus was a grain god. These two things are connected, and thus we have seasonal rituals that celebrate that death and rebirth.
Thank you so much. Rainbow Krampus says, just here to chuckle at the cons in chat who are too afraid to ask Dr. Cooney a question directly. Y'all ain't got 5 or something? I guess there's always a debate or something going on, and there's always someone triggered, of course, that shows up in the chat as well. So thank you, Rainbow, for the 5. I appreciate it. Max Hendricks, thank you for the super chat. The Fayum mummy?
Fayum mummy portraits. Yeah, I know what Max is talking about.
So it says
do you want me to read it?
Yeah, read it. Read it.
You read it. You're the host, man.
Look, no. I feel like if you have to pronounce it, you're better off reading it. You know.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Okay, the Fayum mummy portraits show a cross-cultural religious community that share the Egyptian ritual of embalmment. Mysteriously, these long venerated practices ended forever around the end of the 3rd century. I mean, did they, Max? Did these embalming practices end forever? Because if you're a super rich person and you're going to be buried in the United States, you might have your body embalmed. It might be embalmed with formaldehyde and plastic fluids rather than embalmed with natron and salts and things like that. But I would also encourage you to look at your hagiography, your studies of saints, and to look at what's rule number 1 of how somebody becomes a saint. You dig up their body and you see if they've decomposed. If they've decomposed too much, not a saint. That means that they don't have that divine materiality in them. The Roman Catholic Church still uses that bodily decomposition marker as a means of determining whether somebody is a saint or not. So the embalming part is still kind of there. I will say that because the Egyptians, and this is what I do, I work on the materiality of death and the afterlife, and the idea that only 5% of ancient Egyptians were embalmed. Only 5% of ancient Egyptians had a coffin. If very few people had access to coffins and embalming, and their bodies were meant to live forever, and 95% of ancient Egyptians, the peasantry, if you will, are looking on and seeing and internalizing that they're not going to live forever, and those very rich people will live forever, it creates the biggest wedge, a material wedge that you can imagine, driven through society for those whose bodies will not break down and all of the rest whose bodies will. It creates a kind of sainthood out of a prosperity gospel, if you will. The pushback against this ability for some people to live forever, so to speak, and others to decay, is what the Muslim religion is, where in Islam, as soon as you die, the body must be put directly into the earth. You put the face into the earth. You put the dirt on the face. This is all in the Quran. It's written very clearly that you're meant to do these things. And it's arguably in opposition to this Egyptian extreme inequality, division between rich and poor, where the rich get to have a bodily materialism and the poor have nothing. And you see in the Quran, you're not supposed to have really nice tombs. People get around these things. You'll see lots of nice tombs dating to the Islamic period in Egypt, and currently today even. But it's something that there is pushback against, that people start to see embalming as immoral, as something that you're not supposed to do. But it haunts us, this idea of bodily decomposition, of wanting your body to be preserved. Not very many of us want to give up our youthful, beautiful bodies. Getting old sucks. And this idea of leaving the body behind and going someplace else is disconcerting for many. And if you know your early Christianity, you know the catacombs exist. You can visit them in Rome and in other places where the dead were placed whole-bodied into these different shelves, and they were meant to be there until the rapture. And that from there they would be resurrected with their whole body and flesh. And if you are burned in a more polytheistic Roman way or a Greek way, then you couldn't be resurrected. So people use rituals, the way they bury the dead, as a way of saying, I'm a real Christian, you're not a real Christian. I'm a real this, you're not a real that. Never forget how all of these religions, not just Christianity, but ancient Egyptian religion too, especially ancient Egyptian religion, are used as tools of social power. You could argue that Christianity got that from the ancient Egyptians too. That's a larger conversation.
There's so much you said. Oh, play that back. Joey Martoni, forgive me if I butchered your name. Please comment on Lena Einhorn's Jesus, the Egyptian hypothesis, and the possibility that Jesus brought Osiris ideas back himself. Thanks. Have you heard of Lena Einhorn's work? No, I haven't. But I'm, again, not a New Testament scholar, but I'm open to discussing as an Egyptologist. I mean, the disconnect between New Testament and Egyptology is too wide.
even though, as you know, you mentioned the Gospel of Thomas, so many of these early Gospels, apocryphal Gospels, are written in Coptic and found in Egypt. And that you get an idea that these early Christian contexts found their place and found their way to develop within an Egyptian world. And we can't forget that.
Just to give people a little taste of what her hypothesis is. And it's actually, she's not a New Testament scholar. She's kind of like autodidact who's dove into this and like made a hypothesis where there's a person named the Egyptian in Josephus, and this person's mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. She thinks maybe that the historical Jesus was the Egyptian, and she tries to make connections as to why using Josephus, Acts, and of course the Gospels from like what's going on in the Garden of Gethsemane and stuff like that. But I guess because Josephus names this, we'll call them a radical rebel, whatever, the Egyptian, because they were probably the only person who was like an Egyptian and not a Jew, just like they call the person the Samaritan because they're not a Jew. So this is what most of the scholars, I think, experts on Josephus will say. So that hypothesis, I can see why someone might hear, ooh, Lane Einhorn says Jesus was the Egyptian. Look at all the Egyptian stuff. I wouldn't make that connection. I just personally wouldn't draw that kind of conclusion.
I don't think you need to.
Well,
it's interesting.
That character being Jesus is all I'm saying, rather than it being more mythological motif, because the historical person named the Egyptian was, put down by the Romans, just like the Samaritan and other figures. But I could see why one would want to do that, is what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, until you read it, it's worth checking out. I thought it was an interesting interview I did with her back in the day. B-Bear, could you talk about the 3 days in the underworld motif in ancient Egyptian literature? Thank you.
I hadn't thought about this yet. So, I mean, the three is an important number for all kinds of traditions, and Egypt as well. 3 is the number for plurality. So if you're writing something in hieroglyphic script, say you're writing the word for men, you write one man and then you put 3 strokes under it. So you have the word men. So there's a plurality there. 3 days, I can't think of anything there that's necessarily going to work, except that it's a plurality of days. The Egyptians like to divide the underworld up into 12 hours, 12 gates. So the number 12 is very important. So maybe if we divide the 12 by 4 and we get 3, I don't want to get too numerological here, but growing up Roman Catholic, I remember the incense coming out and the incense used in the 4 cardinal directions. And then a lot of number 3s. It would be interesting. I'm sure dissertations have been written about this, looking at the numerology of the Gospels and how many days are mentioned here or there. You're going to find connections all over the place. Yeah. So, these things work. Yeah.
Question every claim. Thank you for the name and the super chat. Reflecting on one's own belief by looking at another's can open minds. Thank you, hosting Dr. Kara Cooney.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Koval77, thank you so much for that super sticker. Really, really appreciate the support. Scrolling down here. Get her book, everybody. Get the books. This was amazing. Just showing you the power from the Egyptian period. And we don't have much difference with our presidents and such in America, but much more than just that. But the history behind 4 specific kings, wasn't it 4? I think it was 4. That you actually zero in on. 5. Okay.
We only talked about 4 because Taharka is always difficult. But he's really cool. Taharka, the Sudanese king. Yeah.
I'm telling you, you got to get her books. We're going to plug that here in a second when we're done with the super chats. Is the relationship between Horus and Osiris similar to Jesus and God? Isis gets help to take her dead husband's seed to create Horus, Mary's pregnancy?
No, the story is completely connected. So I like this idea of you seeing the Trinity. There's our 3 again, right? Look at these synchronicities. But the idea of the Trinity of God, the Father, and the Holy Spirit, you're making that connection. But also the idea of there being a God, a wife, and a child. That Trinity, or that group of three is something you see in Egyptian temples all over the place. So Karnak temple is Amun-Re, his consort Mut, and their child Khonsu. It's a perfect connection to God the Father, Jesus his son, and then the Mother Mary. And you can see these threes, the Father, the Mother, and the child in temples all over. You see it at Abydos, you see it at Ptah Temple of Memphis. This idea that you need a pair to create the offspring is a very Egyptian thing. And their temples often in the back, here's our three again. When you go to the back Holy of Holies, you see the main God shrine in the center. And then over to the right, you see the son. And over to the left, you see the mothers. And those three shrines are then working as a whole, as the Holy of Holies, where the gods' images dwell. You pull those images out to give them offerings, you put them back into those shrines. But the understanding of there being three gods is a very typical ancient Egyptian thing. So it works. It works.
Thank you so much for that. And that overlapped the earlier point about Mary and God and stuff. So if you didn't watch that and you missed it, you're going to have to play this back, I promise. Dr. Cheryl, deep gratitude for Dr. Cooney and her work. Thank you for courageously relating your work to our modern world.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Cheryl.
And I know that Dr. Cheryl's gotten your books, or at least has purchased at least one of them. I cannot imagine.
No, I know. I think I know Dr. Cheryl from Twitter. I think so. I think I know. Her.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm so glad that we made it. We're at the end. Hallelujah. Let's go ahead and pop up the share here. I want to make sure everybody knows her website. If you like what you heard today, please don't walk away doing nothing about it. If you don't have any income, got it. Cool. You can't afford a book. I understand. You can
library,
like and share it.
Library.
There you go. You just got to find a ride to the library, and then you can get. Is your books like mostly already in libraries right now?
Might be. They're when women ruled the world, they'll probably be in most libraries. The Woman Who Would Be King, probably yes. Dr. Cheryl is all the books. Oh, thanks, Nico Locky. Yeah, so I think I'm in a lot of libraries. Yeah, maybe not a lot of red state libraries these days, but we'll see. You guys can tell me.
She's an enemy.
I grew up in Texas. Don't forget.
Get her out of here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, that's her website. It's in the description. Here's what the books look like. Again, you see me slap my face with it. It's amazing. The book's amazing. I learned a lot. This was hard to swallow, even as someone who already has been opening my mind to a world I've never thought about, empathizing with people who aren't my sex or who aren't my color or any of those kind of things. It really helps you try to put yourself in a world that isn't just people who look like me and sound like me and act like me. You know what I mean? And it's a powerful book because we go right back to the pharaohs. We know you know them. We know you know their material and how they politicized the religion and how powerful monotheism was in all of it as well. Super powerful because Akhenaten gets a zeroed in very close up on a microscope, and it's powerful. And how his wife played a role. That was impressive. Even though they politicized the monotheism, she was a powerful woman. That was
Nefertiti cool. Was my chapter in When Women Ruled the World is more than just a pretty face. She was badass. Yeah, she
was. I gotta have you up here because my ugly mug doesn't deserve it with your books next to it. Your book, The Good Kings, I have it. I also have it on Audible, so I have both copies. The Woman Who Would Be King, the woman, sorry, that would be king. How do you pronounce it? Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut. The fact that you can't pronounce it is really important. You can pronounce Cleopatra. There's a whole lot of consonants in the name Cleopatra, but we all have no problem. We could go to a bus stop and say, do you know who Cleopatra is? Everyone will know. Why? Because she's the cautionary tale that we retell and retell to make people understand why women should not be allowed to rule. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt so well, left Egypt better than she found it, and all of her success was taken over and claimed by the men who ruled after her, and no one can pronounce her name because she's not a part of our cultural memory.
Wow, I did not know this. Okay, I haven't read this one yet. So you're seeing, like, honest, I'm not going to lie and be like, oh yeah, I read her book. You need to get it. Like, we need to go over this book actually at some point. So this is a must get. And it's When Women Ruled the World is the third major book that you wrote. I got to get this. I got to get it on Audible, and I got to get a paperback. I like to have both. And maybe the YouTubers who are watching now can join us. Those who support us here at MythVision can watch and follow along, get the books, because that's what we do, right? We want you to come on. We want you to find out the scholarly work. You put a lot of time, sweat, blood, tears, energy into the productions you're putting in your works, these books. And the least we can do in showing that respect is to get a copy of your work. So I love learning from you.
Oh, thanks so much, Derek. It means a lot. Thanks a lot.
And just so everybody knows, at the beginning of May, I'm going to be going down there recording. We're going to do one for sure. Hopefully we can get 2 courses.
When you say coming down here, you mean coming to Los Angeles, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'm above you. I'm in Washington State. So
yeah.
I'm coming down south, and we're going to record a couple courses, and hopefully we'll get everybody in attendance to join, to sign up for those courses and participate. So being Easter weekend, and I thought, what's better than the original resurrection story, Osiris, than to do that and compare it to the contemporaneous mythology that people love and practice and celebrate and stuff, mostly in a literal sense. They think that way, at least in America. And I wanted to have you come on and celebrate that kind of thing and the teaching with us today. But what would you sum up this entire conversation? How would you want to end it to everybody out there?
Yeah. None of this is a knock on the mythology itself. The mythology of death and rebirth, the mythology of resurrection, is necessary for every human being who lives in this mortal coil. It's something we all share, and it's something that we will all go through, whether we want to or not. So the mythology is not to be denigrated, but what must be pushed back against is the idea that this mythology was created once, it's only part of Christianity, that no other people have a part of this, and that it didn't have any sort of precursor. That's where I go, no, there were many ancient polytheistic peoples who practiced and lived these ideas long before Jesus walked the earth.
I see a few people kind of misunderstood my course thing. Like, don't worry, you're not going to have to be in attendance in person anywhere. You'll be able to purchase it and watch it from wherever you are on your phone.
We're going to shoot it in my living room, I think, right?
It's your house. So you know your house better than I do, but it's going to be in 4K. It's going to look great. It's going to sound great. And a lot of people, I think, are going to be impressed and blown away with what you're going to be teaching. So that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I look forward to it. It'll be a lot of fun.
Me too. I love you. Thank you so much. You're amazing. I'm impressed with what you do. It's always, I always learn at least like 5 or 6 huge major things every time we talk. So,
but you didn't expect the wound of Christ to be a vagina. Now, did you?
That was the biggest takeaway. Oh, now imagine how pissed some people are going to be when they find that out. You know,
I know, it's awesome.
Yeah,
and there's dozens of images. Yeah, you did your Google search, and there it was. Yeah, it's beautiful.
I'd say most of us came out of one. I mean, some might have been C-section, but you would have.
But there's your divine feminine right there. It's awesome. It's awesome. Exactly. She's there, all over. Yes.
Dr. Cooney, everybody, like the video, share it out there, go to a library or purchase it. Help her out, help us out, and never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.